Good morning, guys, and happy Wednesday. Today we are going to be talking about science together, and I'm going to keep talking about fossils. We started talking about those this week, and we have learned already so much about fossils and what they mean to us and what they are in general. So, we learned yesterday that the definition of a fossil is the remains of living things or traces of living things that lived very long ago. So if you need to add that to your definition list, you may do that. Today we're going to be watching a video about today's lesson, and we're also going to be reading in our science book like we normally do on our Google Meets. We're going to do that now together, and then later we will go over any questions that we might have. So let's talk a little bit about what we already know about fossils this far. So we've learned that a fossil does not have to be a body part of an animal that has become a fossil, but it can also be the traces of that animal, such as a footprint or a dropping of the animal that formed that leads us to learn more about that animal. So it does not have to be a body part, but it can be. It can be a bone or a foot or a hand, or it could be a horn or a bone. It can be many different things, but it just helps us to be able to tell what it left behind so that we can learn more about the animal that it is representing. So each fossil represents some type of animal or plant, even a plant. So we also drew our own marking of a fossil that could have been left behind many years ago, and we had really a lot of fun with that. Some of us drew the bones or the feet or footprint of an animal, but we could also, I don't think we talked about that yesterday, but we could have drawn plants because there are a lot of plant fossils that get compressed and have a lot of pressure on them over the years and become fossils. So we also talked about a big word, fossil evidence, yesterday. And the fossil evidence that scientists use, it tells us information about the fossil that we are studying. So we're going to learn even more about the evidence that they use today. So this evidence tells us about the land that was covered by water at some point in order for certain types of fossils to form. Or we could learn about the types of trees that were there. We're going to learn how trees have to do with the making of fossils today. So we also talked about what a scientist may find in our room, in our bedroom, or our classroom in millions or thousands of years from now. We talked about that. Some of you talked about your books or your trophies or your gaming systems. It's hard telling what a scientist could find that we've left behind in many, many years. So let's just start off by watching this video here that is from your textbook. It is going to lead you into today's lesson and give you a glimpse of what we're going to learn about.
Yikes! That's a big, sharp tooth. What kind of animal has a tooth like that? Have you ever seen animals with teeth like that at the zoo? Well, since this is a tooth from a saber-toothed cat, you definitely have not seen it in any zoo. The saber-toothed cat went extinct about 10,000 years ago. The species died out, and this is a fossil. Even though the animal lived a long time ago, when we find remnants of animals like this, we can learn a lot about the animal. We can also learn a lot about what Earth used to be like. So fossils are really important. Many fossils are formed from the hard part of a living organism, just like this one. It takes perfect conditions for a fossil to form, so not very many living organisms form fossils. For a fossil like this tooth to form, the saber-toothed cat would have had to be buried by mud or sand pretty quickly after it died. Organisms that lived or hung out near lakes and seas are more likely to form fossils. This cat could have been drinking from a stream or river when it died. The mud could have covered it quickly, and the remains dissolved by water from in the mud. Once the remains were gone, there was empty space that created the perfect fossil mold. As years went by, minerals started filling in the mold, and they became hard, just like a rock. The minerals had formed a cast fossil. Many, many years later, the stream and land around it changed, uncovering rocks. A scientist could then discover the rock the cast fossil is in and study it. Sometimes a fossil is not an actual body part of the organism. Instead, it is a trace of an organism, like a footprint, a burrow, or other mark left behind. These types of fossils are called trace fossils. Many fossils are found in rock, but there are other ways that fossils can form. Have you ever noticed that some trees have a sticky substance in their trunks? That substance is called resin, and the tree makes it. Because it is so sticky, resin can trap organisms like insects and plants. As the years go by, the resin turns from sticky to very hard, and it turns a yellowish color called amber. These fossils are called amber fossils. Other organisms might get stuck in tar. Tar is from inside Earth, and sometimes it seeps to Earth's surface, creating a big pit full of the sticky stuff. Animals that lived near tar pits, like the saber-toothed cat, would then get stuck in the tar. Thousands of years later, scientists discover the preserved skeletons in the tar. No matter how a fossil is formed, it tells us something about the organism and how it lived. Which fossils do you think tell scientists the most information about the organism? What kind of fossil would you want to discover?
All right. So the two questions that he asked at the end there, the first question he said was, what type of fossil do you think helps scientists the most? Well, if we think about the types of fossils he talked about, the cast fossil is the outside of that animal that he showed whenever it broke apart and it decomposed. That is the outside of it. The mold is the actual filling in that the animal, the space that the animal filled. So it kind of looks like the animal, but is not actually the animal. And so don't get confused about the fact that the animal is not still there, but the minerals and the rocks that come in to form that animal where it was is the mold. And the trace fossil is the footprints or whatever the animal left behind. So I think that the mold would probably be the most helpful to scientists to learn all about the size of the animal or the plant that is being represented by this fossil. And the second question he asked us was, what type of fossil would you like to find? And we're all different, so what kind of fossil would you like to find? You can let me know later in our Google Meet what kind of fossil that you would like to find, okay? So now let's move on to our reading for today. We're going to read out of our textbook. Go ahead and get your textbook out and turn to page 262 and 263 if you have not opened it already. And then press pause on my video and then you can play whenever you're ready. Okay, so here we go. We're going to be looking at this illustration here that explains to us how a fossil is formed. So if we look at number 1 over here, a fish dies in the ocean and its body sinks to the ocean floor. So if we think about a fish and when it dies, it can fall straight to the ocean. So if we think, to the floor of the ocean. So if we think about if you've ever been to the ocean, to the beach before, and you have been out on the sand and sometimes you'll see a dead fish that comes up on the sand and it may be a little bit yucky or scary to you or you may think it's cool, but that means that it did not actually sink to the bottom of the ocean. But anytime that it doesn't do that, it either gets eaten by another animal in the ocean or it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. So that's what happens there. And then after that happens, in number 2 says the fish's body is quickly covered with layers of mud or sand on the ocean floor. So if you'll think about when you're sitting at the edge of the water, even at the lake, but mostly at the beach, when you're sitting at the edge of the water and the water keeps coming up, the sand starts to fill you. It starts to go around your body. And so that's what happens to that fish there. And then number 3 says water flows to the Rock and dissolves the remains of the fish. The empty space left behind is a fossil mold. So the mold we talked about looks like the animal, but it is not the actual animal. And then number 4 says materials enter the mold and harden over many years. This forms a cast fossil. Over time, these layers form rock. So these mud layers here, they're going to push down on this fossil and put a lot of pressure on it, and it eventually becomes rock over time. But this is, you're going to see number 5 here, this is after millions of years, the ocean changes and causes the formation of land to change. So this process takes millions of years, even up to hundreds of millions of years. So the things that we are finding today are from hundreds of millions of years ago, and it's so cool that we have the technology and the people that are smart enough and have enough knowledge to learn about these types of things. And so our first question that we have down here says, some fossils are found whole and some fossils are found in parts. Why do you think that happens? Well, in my opinion, I think that it happens because maybe the animal that is being turned into a fossil is not strong enough. It may be too small. We talked about yesterday that some of these fossils are smaller than you can see in a microscope, and some of them are as large as a dinosaur. So maybe it just couldn't handle the pressure and parts of it broke off. I think that that could be a reason why that it fell, that parts of it fell off and they're found in different parts. So moving on to the next page, we're going to talk about animals that form fossils in sap and ice. All right. So not all fossils are found in rock. Some fossils are in ancient tree resin. The fossils form when resin oozes down a tree trunk. The resin can trap small animals such as insects or small plants. The resin hardens over time and forms honey-colored amber. You can see in the photo how amber preserves the body of an insect. Amber fossils can be more than 100 million years old. Oh my goodness. So here's a picture of this fossil that it's talking about here. And you can see that in your book. And then the next paragraph there says, fossils also form when living things become trapped in ice. Woolly mammoths, like the one in the picture, lived across many parts of Earth until about 4,000 years ago. Scientists have found several frozen mammoths. The mammoths froze when the climate was colder than it is today. Because they were frozen, many of the soft body parts of the mammoths did not decay. Scientists can gather different kinds of information from the soft body parts than from hard parts such as bones. Some of the information helps them figure out how the animal moved, what it ate, and what its body shape was. So fossils can tell the scientists all of that information there. And this is the woolly mammoth that it was talking about there. And then the question here that we have says, a paleontologist discovers a fossil in ice. It is the remains of an unusual fish. The paleontologist has never seen this kind of fish before. Write 2 questions that the paleontologist may ask to find out how it formed. Well, let's think about this. He's never seen this kind of fish before, so we need to think about what kind of land was it found on, and about how long do we think that this animal has been frozen? Because then that'll tell us maybe what kind of fish it was. So let's move on to fossils of tar. All right, another kind of fossil formed in tar pits. Tar pits are areas filled with sticky material that seeps to the Earth's surface from inside Earth. An example is the La Brea tar pits in California. Thousands of years ago, animals there became trapped in tar. Most of the animals were meat eaters. Scientists think that groups of animals chased prey into the tar pit. Both the prey and the meat-eating animals became trapped. The tar preserved their skeletons. Many of the kinds of organisms that formed fossils are extinct or no longer living on Earth. And we heard about that in our video. So in your definition for extinct, it is no longer living on Earth. Dinosaurs are an extinct kind of animal. Today we will find the fossilized bones of dinosaurs. Scientists have learned a lot by studying fossils. And think about how much we know about dinosaurs today. And that was millions of years ago. So if you will just think about what we know about dinosaurs right now, think about how much more that we have to learn about all of these other types of animals that lived that long ago. All right. So our question here says, what do you think scientists can learn by studying a fossil bone of a dinosaur? Well, we know by studying the fossil bones, we know how big it was. We could even know what kind of food it ate by the types of bones that it had. And then let's move on to our lesson review questions. So number 1 says, what is a fossil? We've talked all week about fossils, and we know that fossils can be body parts of animals or traces that animals left behind many, many years ago. And these are representations. If you want to write the exact definition that we've already talked about, you may do that also. And that was, fossils are the remains of living things or traces of living things that lived very long ago. And then the number 2 question here says, 2 ancient plants died at the same time. One was near a river and the other was on a grassy hillside. Which would be more likely to become a fossil? Explain why. So if we think back to our illustration that we did at the beginning with the fish that was in the water, that when the mud covered it and it began to press down on it, that's when the fossil began to form. So I would think that the plant that was near the river would become a fossil faster because it has the better situation for a fossil to form. Eventually, the one that was on the grassy hillside may become a fossil, but the conditions would have to change. And we know that it can, but that takes many, many years. So the plant that was on the river would probably fall into the river and become pressed down on and then become rock, just like the fish did. All right, so now we have talked all about the types of fossils, how fossils form, where they form, the evidence that scientists have, and why they use them. We've learned so much this week, and we're going to have our quiz on Friday just to see how much we have learned. I hope that this video helps you understand more about fossils, and Miss Goodman has a video she wants for you to watch also that's posted on Google Classroom. And I hope that we just know all about fossils and we're ready to go out in the backyard and start looking for them. I love you all, and I can't wait to see you all later. Bye.